here we go.
If you go online and search around social media, you'll quickly find out that Steph Curry has so many fans. It's very understandable. The guy is the greatest shooter that the game of basketball has ever seen.
Pause it. Right there. Okay. This is what most YouTubers and this is what most media members, and especially on TV, will start and end with Steph Curry arguments, with Steph Curry, discourse and narratives. They'll start and end it with the greatest shooter ever, which is okay, but that's been the case for 7 years. And I think at this stage of his career, we should be consensusly calling him a top 10 player ever, one of the top 3 offensive players ever, and one of the best scorers ever. And I don't understand why a guy who averages 26 points for his career, about 25 points for his career, and in the playoffs 26 points for his career, is not just a shooter. So when you keep calling him the greatest shooter of all time, it is reductive. It is labeling and boxing him into his greatest strength. That is like saying LeBron James is the greatest driver of the basketball ever. No, they call him one of the greatest players ever. They call Kareem Abdul-Jabbar one of the greatest players ever. Not just one of the greatest scorers ever. See, they box Steph's greatest ability, and they define him by that one thing, which limits the scope of how we view him as a basketball player. He's a great on-ball playmaker. He's a great off-ball playmaker, and one of the best rebounding guards you'll see in the NBA today. He's an improved defender. I have the numbers to back that up, and I'll get to that another time. But my overall point is that you hear a lot of these YouTubers, you hear a lot of these media members start and end conversations when it comes to Steph with being the greatest shooter ever, and it's reductive, and it takes away from his all-around game, which to me is worth mentioning because it's something that rivals that of the greatest players ever. All right, I'm paused.
He spaces the floor like no one else has before, and with him leading the way, he has pushed the NBA into a new era, focused almost entirely on three-point shooting. He's also a 6'3" player who isn't an athletically gifted freak like many modern-day superstars. Yet he still finds a way to be an elite ball player year in and year out. Many people find this quality admirable. No matter how you slice it, Steph has firmly established himself as one of the greatest basketball players to ever live. Now with that being said, many of his fans online, many modern athletes, and much of the mainstream media are anxious to put him into the top spot of the greatest point guards of all time. And my response to that is,
stop it. Get some help.
It's not that I think Steph isn't on his way to the top. He's still very elite, and by the end of his career, he might just be the consensus pick over Magic Johnson. But in my opinion, this is the perfect example of recency bias, and way too many people being a slave of the moment. It's so premature to already put him in the top spot, but many people forget just how dominant Magic Johnson was in such a short period of time. Unlike many of today's modern legends, Magic wasn't blessed with a long and healthy career. In 1991, he shook the world with his announcement that he...
All right, so he made a couple points there. So he started off saying, Steph's an elite basketball player at his frame, blah, 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 which is fair. That's cool, and I'm happy he acknowledged that. But then he went on to say that Magic Johnson and Steph Curry should essentially not be in the same conversation as being the greatest point guards ever. That essentially Magic Johnson clears Steph, and that even having the conversation right now, today, in the present day, is premature and Steph is not worthy of even being argued for that top spot. Magic is, to him, the consensus clear number one point guard of all time, and that the conversation isn't even to be had. And now he was a bit. So basically, what he's doing right now is he's getting into his next point, which is that Magic was not blessed with a healthy career, and you're about to hear him expand on this with the diagnosis of AIDS that he had. But he basically gets into this long-winded point of Magic did not have a healthy career. His prime was not as long as other players because of this unfortunate circumstance. And he talks about, his career was shortened, and he'll get into this. I'm basically explaining it, but let me point this out. because I want this to be understood as well. Steph Curry, if anyone was not blessed with a healthy career, with a shortened, limited prime because of health, because of injuries and circumstances, I would argue Steph Curry. And the thing is, if this particular individual acknowledged that reality as well, that not only for Magic's prime was shortened, but as well as Steph's, I would have no problem with this. He never mentioned once how Steph had multiple ankle surgeries, how he had a season in 2000, in 2012. I think Steph played less than like 20 games or less than 30 games. He had to basically sit out the entire season with ankle injuries. The first few seasons of his career, he was second in Rookie of the Year voting coming into the NBA. The next season, he had dealt with some ankle problems that had made his NBA future and the current state of his career a little bit wonky. And then the following season, he had received an ankle surgery that basically took him out. And there's a reason he received, I think it was like a 4-year, $44 million contract, I think it was, that was extremely underpaid, extremely undervalued, because Steph's injuries and the concern of that for the longevity of his career was a real question, which is why he didn't receive a contract that was necessarily like fair compared to his production and his ability and his projected production and growth and development over time. But to say that Magic was plagued by a shortened prime and career due to injuries or circumstances beyond his control is the same logic you can apply to Steph for the first handful of seasons for his career, being drafted to a bad team. Magic Johnson.
Trey, I love Steph, but Magic had AIDS. Like, are we really gonna do this?
No.
Magic
Wait.
literally had AIDS.
Let me. No. That's
So
fine.
it's Steph's fault that Magic couldn't stop
hold
Chucky?
on 1 second.
That's not the point.
Let Dre rock.
The
It's a
point
good
is,
point. Magic had AIDS, but the point that Dre was making is things happen beyond Magic Johnson's control.
right. That's what I'm saying.
Riding
My
14
bad,
women
Trey.
a night was beyond Magic Johnson's was in Magic Johnson's control. Like, he didn't have to retire from the game of basketball. He chose to retire from the game of basketball, and it is what it is. But Dre, I just want to touch on 2 points before it gets lost. I don't mean to interrupt.
Of course.
It's a great presentation. But one thing that he spoke on is most don't speak about Steph Curry as an athletic. But do people even know what the definition of athlete is? Like, athlete is an individual who plays multiple sports, is an individual who excels in physical exercises. Like a marathon runner is an athlete. Like, an NBA player is an athlete. A golfer is an athlete. So I think that point is mute. And then also, they were calling Magic Johnson the best point guard in 1985. I was alive. So they're talking of like premature and doing all this. Remember, Oscar Robertson was doing all these triple doubles, doing all that. He was at that time was considered the best. They were already saying he's better than him in 1985. Do you know what year Magic Johnson got drafted?
What year?
79.
79, right?
79-80. 79-80.
Which was his rookie year.
Yes.
That was the year that he actually, and he's going to bring this point up as well.
But what I'm saying is 6 years into his career, they were calling him the best point guard ever. 6 years. So,
I mean, no other point guard had multiple titles at that point, so I get why.
You get why what?
That's why they said he was the best point guard in 1985. Didn't Magic win like back-to-back that like around that time? So, and then but I get what you're saying. Finish. I get what you're saying.
Well, my ultimate point is
that's
this, right?
super premature. Like,
and I understand
1985 from?
It is.
I understand that the AIDS situation was unfortunate, but my point is that in this video, the analyst that is breaking down the circumstances which led to shortening Magic Johnson's career, and he's applying it to one player, I believe that same logic should be applied to another player in Steph, where he had injuries that plagued his career early on, and that cut his prime and that cut his career short as well. And I'm just saying that at the end of the day, we can't complain about circumstances and acknowledge them for one player and not do it for another. I know, like, in a vacuum, right, they're different things, and I'm not comparing the two. I'm just making a straight arrow, straight shooter argument that We have to keep consistency, even if it's not the same, even if you want to call it a false equivalence. The fact is that the logic remains the same when it comes to acknowledging what goes into the totality of a player's career. And I just felt like, look, in this video, you can talk about Magic circumstances all you want, but if you fail to acknowledge what happened to Steph early in his career, being drafted to an organization that that pick had 7 overall, right? 7th overall pick, a team that was one of the worst franchises in all of basketball, a team that was a laughingstock of the NBA. Right? They had no business. Magic was drafted to a team. You want to talk about circumstances that had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that made the finals in his rookie year, one of the greatest players of all time. Right? You could talk about up and down the list, a guy like Jamal Wilkes, another great, and another all-time NBA great player, legend. And so my ultimate point is that I just think we have to make a conscious effort as analysts and people that love the game of basketball, that if we're going to make arguments, we have to be able to make the conscious effort to acknowledge the scope of these circumstances. So, like, we can't just apply it for one player and not for another. We can't just look at, injuries or whatnot for one player. We have to look at drafting situations. Magic Johnson was drafted to a much better situation than Steph. And let me make this point, too, because this is a big point. People say, oh, Steph is loyal because he was never put in a situation where he didn't have to be. In fact, Steph was put in such a good situation. Why would he not be loyal? Like, he should be loyal. Of course, it's easy to be loyal when you're in a good situation. What they fail to acknowledge is that Steph Curry is the reason the situation is good. Steph Curry is the reason he can be loyal because he's made the situation. He's turned the Warriors from a $450 million franchise to a $4 billion franchise. When you are the cause, the sole reason why a franchise can turn around from the laughingstock of the NBA to one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history, and you're questioning his loyalty, you should be asking, well, you know what? Doesn't it make sense that he's loyal to a team that he built from the ground up, that he created? He created his own luck. He created his own reasons to be loyal. He is the reason he should be loyal. So that is just backwards logic because the situation wasn't handed to him like a Magic Johnson, you could argue. Kareem being there, right? Jamal Wilkes being there, who averaged 21 and 7 rebounds in those finals in 1979. My only point is that why do we have to omit information? This is lying by omission. Or we just are ignorant. We don't know these things. So one or the other. I'm not saying I know everything, but what I definitely do make a conscious effort to do is acknowledge and discover the scope of everything. What applies to Magic? What applies to Steph? What logic, what lines of reasoning can I apply to both? And what's the scope of it? What does it look like? And when we can do that and we can have an open and complete and total honest conversation, that's where I'm like, okay, now we acknowledge this and that, okay, and then what weighs more? And then we can have those subjective debates on top of it. But the only objective thing we can do is acknowledge the reality behind both players and not omit or reduce or limit for one or ignore for the other. So that's my only point. Anyways, he's going to break down, I know this was long-winded, but this individual is going to break down exactly why Magic Johnson's career was cut short, and particularly his prime. And that's 100% a fair argument. My only point is that logic should also be applied to Steph. You can call it a false equivalence, but the logic behind it is the point I'm making. I'm not talking about the severity of AIDS versus what a couple ankle surgeries, which still derailed Steph's career, are. Because at the end of the day, both circumstances affected both careers and the longevity of them. Anyways, appreciate you, Seidel. Could you unpause it?
He had obtained HIV. You need to understand, when Magic played his last game before that announcement, he was only 31 years old. Think about other NBA greats if they retired at that same age. Dirk Nowitzki would no longer be an NBA champion. LeBron James would only have 2 rings instead of 4. Shaq would have 3 titles instead of 4. Duncan would have 4 titles instead of 5. Michael Jordan would only have 3 titles instead of 6. And Steph Curry would only have 3 titles instead of 4. Magic Johnson
All right, wait, pause
5 championship rings.
Yeah, how does that even make
when he
sense?
had
Wait,
to
just really quickly. So I want to say this really quickly. What he's saying is, Magic Johnson's career was cut short at the age of 31. I can make the argument that, okay, why don't we start Steph Curry's career at the age of 24 or 25 when his ankles were fully healthy, and oh wait, that would take away Magic's rookie year title in 1979 next to Kareem, where he won Finals MVP, dropped 42 and 15 in Game 6 of the Finals. I can apply that same logic. That would take away a lot from Magic's legacy if I did that. So just arbitrarily cutting careers short because circumstances affected one player and not acknowledging similar circumstances for another is just a failed argument.
Dre, he's making the case for Steph Curry right now.
You understand what I'm saying? The logic.
He's making the case for Steph right now.
Absolutely. My ultimate point is
all those dudes wouldn't have titles. That's some of the biggest bullshit I've ever heard.
Hold on.
Buddy's
hold on. Hold on. It's bullshit. But is when Magic Johnson played and got drafted, and there was only hold on when Magic doesn't have how many teams were there in 1979, 1980?
22.
How many teams are there now?
30.
You study stats, right?
I study stats.
So there's the law of averages. So it's more the likelihood percentile wise to win an NBA championship in that era versus this era is more difficult.
There's less when there's less competition. Exactly.
Okay. I'm just checking.
And that's my ultimate point, right? Is that why is this guy, does he have the authority? And this is not a shot at him. I'm just making an overarching logical argument, which is essentially, why are we arbitrarily cutting players' careers short to serve the purpose to fulfill the logic of another player, right? So essentially we're saying Magic Johnson's career and his prime was cut short at the age of 31. If these other great players' careers had these circumstances, this would be their current resume. But then I could say Steph Curry's career didn't really get jump-started until the age of 24, 25. And that I could essentially say, why don't we start every player's career at the age of 23, 24, whatever it was. It was like mid-20s. And Magic Johnson was drafted at the age of 20 years old in 1979. His career is heavily defined by that rookie season championship and Finals MVP when he dropped 42 points and 15 rebounds against the Philadelphia 76ers in 6 games, and as a rookie, and when Kareem was injured, I believe, which made because Magic started at center in Game 6, so that made that moment and that series such an impactful one for his career. And he was 20 years old. So if I just completely remove that from history to serve an argument that helps what I'm trying to convey when it comes to Steph, that to me is just, there's no logic behind that. We can only compare what they've accomplished based on the circumstances they've been under, or we can acknowledge the circumstances that they've been handed, but then acknowledge all of the circumstances. We're not going to just pick and choose which circumstances affect which player, or omit or not show the complete picture. We have to do our best to acknowledge the scope of these circumstances and apply them to both players equally and fairly. That's my point.
Why is it Steph's fault that Magic couldn't stop fucking? I don't understand why it's Steph's problem.
Yeah, well, you know what? Then it gets into this very granular, subjective argument. So
what don't you understand?
Well,
why is it Steph's fault that Magic couldn't stop fucking? Why is it Steph's problem?
And that's a fair argument. Here's what I'll say to that, right? At this point, I'm just gonna broad brush it with circumstances, because you're right. We can just pick and choose, like, well, this is in his control, that's out of his control. This is so. The way I'm just gonna approach this is broad brush it. Just call these things circumstances, because that's what they are. These things are just circumstances that affect the player's career. So that's what that's how I'm gonna treat it. But anyways, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dre. My thing, nobody's brought it up yet, and I'm sure that they'll bring it up. And I'm not saying you didn't think about it, but again, you have to go relative to eras, right? You have to just like if you're speaking about true shooting relative to era, you're gonna have to speak on like what they did relative to era. Like, do you know Magic Johnson never had a season where he played less than 36 minutes a game?
I did not know that, actually.
No, because this is what I'm talking about. You could watch the YouTube videos to your blue in the face, and I'm not saying you specifically. I'm talking about
Right.
everybody. This is why I said earlier on, context is the number one thing variable when you're speaking about NBA basketball. And it's not skill. It's not the team they played for. It's context. You gotta speak about the time. Just like people who weren't around in 2020 cannot know what don't even will not know what it's like to be in COVID-19. They would think
Right.
COVID-19 happened in 2019 without context. So what I'm saying is, can you tell me a season that how many seasons of Steph Curry played 36 minutes plus? If anybody in the chat can tell me that, how many seasons out of Steph's 14 seasons has he played over 36 minutes a game? I digress. I'm just bowing out. I'm listening. I'm just adding my little 2 cents for the context purposes.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point. Um, okay, so and I want to also apply this because you made the point earlier about how many teams we're playing. Because we listen, man. I don't go down the circumstances rabbit hole, but apparently this individual is exploring it. So I'm gonna go along with that, and I'm gonna say that Magic Johnson played in a
It's three,
league.
by the way.
What's up?
It's three, by the way. It's three, by
Three
the way.
three
Steph's only
seasons.
had 3 seasons over 36 minutes.
Okay. So yeah, and Magic, I think never, like Shadow said, never played a season under 36. I think that's what Shadow said, right?
If you want to be technical, I think he had one season 35.9, and I'm not even looking.
Okay,
I just know Magic Johnson because I was alive to watch Magic Johnson. Magic Johnson
yeah,
was a great player. It
of
was
course,
one of my dad's favorite players of all time. Like I know, and I sat in the living room watching. Not even the living room. Back in the days, we didn't call it. The family room, with speaking and talking to my dad and my uncles and everything. Their Lakers drip down to from the flow up to toe up. That's their Lakers. But what I'm saying is, as far as you got to put these things into perspective, the time, the era, the style of basketball,
right,
the dominance, the usage, compare minutes, because a guy who's playing 31 minutes or 32 minutes for his career versus a guy of 36 minutes. What happens when you give Steph 30 things? So skew it, just like you can. I'm sure you can go on Basketball Reference,
right,
or
per 36,
you can go on StatsMuse and skew it and really
yeah,
do per 36. If,
proportionally convert it proportionally, right? Exactly. No, you're right, and
so if we're
that's
comparing, let's compare the actual players, not just their career. Let's compare the actual players. Like, you know what I mean?
right.
So that's
I got a question. How many teams during Magic Johnson's era who made the playoffs had a positive record?
That's a
Like,
great.
what were the records back then?
So I don't know the extent of it personally, but I do know that in his rookie season, that the sixth seed, which made the playoffs that year, was the Portland Trailblazers. They won 38 games.
but 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 also up into that, like it was a monopoly back then. Like,
Well,
don't
yes, the
quote
West
me,
was.
I would be surprised if more than 8 NBA teams ever won an NBA championship up to that point.
The West was
Like, it was just the
incredibly deep,
Celtics, Lakers,
right? And
yeah,
76ers at times.
76ers, but it was like it would scramble around that, like
No, you're right. Yeah.
B, you know, you're a native New Yorker. How many
Yes.
chips did the Knicks win?
Stop it, Shadow. Stop it. my dad would cuss you out if you said some shit like that, bro.
He's old.
But to expand on that point, right? 22 teams were in the NBA. That was the league when Magic Johnson first was drafted. 12 teams made the playoffs. I want everybody to understand this. This is important context because when people use
You gotta talk about context is key. Go
here's
ahead, Dre.
the thing. Here's the thing.
I'm rock with you.
I don't get into the circumstantial and contextual arguments, the granular of it, unless my opposition, the counter arguments that are presented before me, involve these circumstances that are applied for one player, not for another, or are incomplete. So essentially, here's what I'm going to say. Magic Johnson was drafted into a league that had 22 teams. 12 teams out of those 22 made the playoffs, which means 6 teams from each conference were basically that was the format. Now, did you know there was something called a first round bye?
I knew that.
Like the NFL, a first round
which
bye.
means that
Yes,
that
sir. Context
that
is
the Los
key.
Angeles Lakers did not have to play in the first round the season that Magic Johnson won his first title as a rookie. By the way, playing with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So essentially, they bypassed an entire round of basketball in a league that had 8 less teams than today. I'm just
So
saying.
so 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 basically, they were automatically in the round of six, like this.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, it's like the
exactly.
NFL. It's like the NFL with the wild card and the top teams in each division gets a first round bye.
So my ultimate point is that exactly no first round means Steph never gets injured versus the Rockets in 2016. Son got exactly. So why don't we just pretend that first rounds didn't exist, and why don't we just hand Steph Curry the title in 2016? Now he's a back-to-back champion. Now two. You see what I'm saying? Like we can't
Dre,
do this.
we're getting crazy with this, man. Like we gotta
Well,
play
that's my
who.
point. But
The man
that's
still
my
had
point.
42 and 15. Like I don't care who he played. He
Well,
had
no, no,
42
no.
and
But
15.
it matters because this individual essentially cut careers short arbitrarily, saying that
Relative
these
to the league, that doesn't matter, Jay.
Huh?
I don't want to
Are
get
you
down
guys
this rabbit
saying
hole.
that relative to
Trust
the
me.
league doesn't matter? Competition doesn't
I,
matter?
No, I'm
I'm
saying
not.
they played in two
Are you
different eras.
saying competition
We're not
doesn't matter?
Bill
So
Russell
I just need
mid and
clarity
Magic
for the
Johnson era.
chat. I'm just saying, like, are you saying competition doesn't matter? Who people play doesn't matter?
Of course it does.
Okay, so Dre, continue, please.
Well, no. Well, that's a great point. Is that, um, like the competition, right? So like we talk about competition, and you're only like as good as the competition you play against, right? So so that's a fair point, and I'll get into those points a little bit more deeper because like I believe accolades, right? Because this individual, the one that made this YouTube video, he's going to basically delve into accolades being the centerpiece of his argument, and he's going to basically break down particular accolades that Magic is favorable in. And I could also argue that accolades are a reflection of your ability just as much as that of your competition. If you have weaker competition, the likelihood of you winning particular accolades increases. Now, again, this logical argument can be applied in multiple different ways, and I'm just saying that I'm not going to take away anything from what Magic won. But if this individual wants to apply certain logical arguments against Steph, then I can come up with these arguments against Magic and argue that circumstantially his competition was weaker, which resulted in him acquiring more accolades throughout the course of his career than Steph. I could argue that, but I'm not. That's not my argument. That's not my argument.
Both legends. Let's continue the clip,
Of
and
course, of course.
hopefully they show some Magic highlights with Magic Johnson dribbling the basketball forward and not backing anybody down.
Yeah, let's unpause this side. I appreciate you.
Retire at such an early age, and there was still a second half of his career in store that we never got to witness. Who knows? Magic may have ended up with 7 or 8 championships if he wasn't forced to retire early. Now don't get me wrong, my point isn't to give Magic credit for things that he actually didn't accomplish. But what you certainly can't argue is the fact that Magic built a GOAT candidate resume in roughly half the time that it took everyone else to build theirs. Also consider this. In the last 2 seasons leading up to that retirement, Magic was the league MVP in 1990, and he was the MVP runner-up in 1991.
Can you
Game
hold on,
5 of the 91
Dre? Sorry,
finals
can you
with
pause it for 1 second?
Yep. Go ahead.
There's inconsistency. Like if Magic Johnson wasn't forced to retire, Magic Johnson is the one who came to the conclusion in 1991 to retire. The NBA wanted him to continue. They spoke to multiple doctors. At that time, they had like 5 or 6 doctors who check him out and said you can continue playing as long as the rest of the guys were. There was, obviously it was new, so a lot of people were ignorant to the fact. But Magic Johnson chose to retire. Like this, Magic Johnson was forced to retire because of AIDS. Like there was multiple people dealing with AIDS at that time, and the medicine that that's why at the time the medicine he was using, that's why it went on to fade away, and everyone is wondering how come Magic Johnson it didn't go into full blown HIV or whatnot. So I just want to make clarity on that point.
And just really quickly as well, this individual made the point that he had a GOAT case in half the time as most NBA legends, and I'll acknowledge like Magic from a accolades and a winning standpoint. is one of the greatest to do it when you talk about like how little time he accomplished these things in, like relative to that. You hear like the phrase ring efficiency and all that stuff, but like I could also apply the same shit to Steph. Like I can apply the same thing to Steph and say that he went to 5 finals in straight, right? And he went to 6 finals in 9 years, and he won 4 of them. Magic's won 5. I could argue that, Steph's career is only, 13, 14 years, right? It's like 14 years. So, I mean, Steph, relative, and then I could apply the competition argument, say relative to competition, Steph's, if you scale it, accomplished more, like in less time, right? Because there's more teams.
With less Hall of Famers, by the way.
And hold on too. He's playing against the people who they think is the GOAT. He beat that man 3 fucking times in the NBA Finals.
Yeah, yep, that's
There's no argument. Magic never beat Jordan. Magic never beat Jordan. When Magic played Jordan, they fucking lost. Steph beat LeBron 3 times.
Context
And I don't want to hear
matters, right, Shadow?
fucking
Context
he
matters.
had Kevin Durant because he beat him before he had fucking Kevin Durant.
Bro, Magic Johnson had AC Green, AC Jerry Curl Green. He had fucking
Yeah, James
Norm
Worthy,
Nixon. He
James
had
Worthy.
fucking
Jamal
James
Wilkes,
Worthy,
Jamal Wilkes.
Rambis, Kupchak. Like the amount of Hall of Famers that man played with is ridiculous, bro.
Anyways, again, I'm
Hey,
not.
Kupchak.
This is not to tear down Magic, by the way. I'm just saying that because I don't want to do that. I just want to have a fair and honest argument about Steph Curry and Magic Johnson. But if we're
No,
going
keep
to,
it on to context. We got to let the people know because a lot of
right,
people
and
don't know
100%, if we're
that
going to be
Magic
Just
selective,
Johnson played this
context,
many
Scott.
minutes. He
We're
didn't
not
know
gonna
that
just sit
who they
here and act
played first
like
round buys. This is good
I just
information,
don't.
Dre.
nobody
I just
does.
don't.
Like that's all I'm
No,
saying.
but that's
Like
what I'm saying. But we can do our best. But we can do our best.
context matters. The dude trying to act like we beat like I said. I love Steph. We all know that. Well, I'm over him with KD and all that shit. But we do not let's not act like Steph single handedly just whooped LeBron 3 straight times. It was a team effort. We all beat them,
But
and
who was
LeBron
catching
had a good team
schemes?
too.
Who was catching schemes in that series?
Who's what?
Who was catching schemes? Who was the one Tyronn Lue said, we got to take him out the offense? We have to take Steph out the offense.
Who had the score still?
Yeah.
My point is, we need to prove that, like I said, go ahead with the context. My point is, there needs to be more context in that. Don't just say Steph just beat him. It was Steph, and that's all I'm saying. Like, is Steph the reason why we won? Obviously, he's the reason why he has 4 rings. He's the engine of the offense. I get what you're saying, but context matters. That's all I'm saying.
But I
You
agree.
said that
But you know
before,
what? You make a
Shadow.
fair point.
Throw in the context. That's all I'm saying.
Nobody is the reason though. Like in a
Yeah,
vacuum, you
that's
could
what.
argue like every team wins. But if you want to boil it down to one player, it comes down to Steph. Just like if you want to say, but see, here's the
Absolutely,
thing. I think that's a more
absolutely.
conclusive argument than when you look at those Lakers teams. Like you could argue that Magic, yes, like he was the playmaker of that team. He set the table up for Kareem, but Kareem is consensus top 5, top 3 player ever. Like that argument is a much closer one than that of Steph and KD. That's how I see it. But anyways, I just want to make sure that people aren't selective with how they, the brushes they paint, with the context they provide, with the logic that they introduce. Like, you know what I'm saying? I just want it to be consistent as possible. And I'm not saying that's going to happen necessarily all the time, but you can do your best. You can at least try your best to paint as complete a picture as possible. Anyways, appreciate you, Seidel. Unpause it if you can.
Which was the last game of that season, Magic had 16 points, 20 assists, and 11 rebounds. He got 20 assists in a finals game, while his 2 best scoring options were out with injuries, which were James Worthy and Byron Scott. Not only were there no signs of him slowing down, but you could argue that he was just as good as ever. Steph has already significantly passed Magic in seasons played, yet he's still trying to catch him in terms of every major accolade, including MVPs, championships, finals MVPs, and all NBA teams. This is because Magic was incredible from the start of his career until the very end. The greatest playoff performance in NBA history was when a 20-year-old rookie guard replaced an injured Kareem Abdul-Jabbar at center and won the championship-clinching 6th game with a total of 42 points, 15 rebounds, 7 assists, and 3 steals on 61% shooting. And what people often fail to consider is how a rookie Magic did that against the Philadelphia 76ers, who were the #1 ranked defense that season. That was Magic's impact in his first season. While on the other hand, Steph Curry wasn't even considered as an elite player in the league until his 4th or 5th season.
Pause it.
Again, I just can't emphasize enough.
So right here, right? Again, he makes fair arguments. And everybody here would be out of their minds to say Magic Johnson is not consensus top 10 or borderline top 5 ever. Like, Magic is in most people's top 5s, easily top 10. That's not even up for debate. Magic Johnson is one of the greatest players ever, one of the greatest point guards ever, whatever you want to call it. And I'm not taking away from what he's accomplished. But again, you see what he did there. He said how Magic came into the NBA, beat the #1 ranked defense, right, in the NBA Finals. But what did I just say earlier? He didn't mention how there were 22 teams in the NBA. He didn't mention that you got a privileged first-round bye. You didn't have to play an entire round of basketball because you had a higher seed.
And another thing he didn't mention is that Magic got drafted to the fucking Lakers, dog. The Lakers, they were already a contender before him.
Exactly. So
imagine if LeBron or Melo in that 2003 draft class got drafted to the fucking Lakers.
Now, what he failed to acknowledge with Steph is, well, Steph had ankle injuries that plagued his career early on, multiple ankle surgeries, and it took some time off of his early career. He was second in Rookie of the Year voting. He lost to Tyreek Evans, but he was still a very good player coming into the NBA, and he was drafted to a much worse team, a much worse organization, much worse ownership, next to much worse players, with much worse circumstances from an injury standpoint. Where Magic had his circumstances plague him in his early 30s, Steph had his injury circumstances plague him in his early 20s. So, again, we have to acknowledge the scope of reality here. We can't just pick and choose which circumstances and context affects one player and not the other. That's all I'm saying. And that's why, again, Magic has more titles, more finals MVPs, more MVPs, more, all NBAs, all that stuff than Steph. And that's all good and well because relative to era, Magic, again, he's one of the greatest players ever. He dominated his era. There's no doubt in my mind. He dominated the 80s. That's not even up for debate. But if we're going to acknowledge these circumstances, we have to acknowledge them for both players. And if we're going to acknowledge circumstances, let's acknowledge competition, where we mentioned earlier, right? Fewer teams, first-round buys, all that stuff. And we obviously can argue that the pool of NBA players today are far more skilled and talented than that of the 80s. So I don't want to go down those rabbit holes, but when I'm presented with arguments and logic that's incomplete and selective like this, I have no choice but to go to full court press and provide any angle and every counter argument I can to show that providing as complete analysis as possible is the only way to make these comparisons fairly. Anyways, appreciate you, Saito. If you can, unpause.
How Magic didn't have the luxury of a full career like many other greats did. In this modern NBA, LeBron James is entering his 21st season in the league. Chris Paul is entering his 19th, and Kevin Durant is entering his 16th. John Stockton was another great point guard from Magic Johnson's era, and he played 19 seasons in the NBA. Magic only played 12 seasons before HIV caused him to retire. If he had a career as long as the other greats I previously mentioned, then he would have been competing for championships alongside of Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant in the twilight of his career. In Magic's 12 seasons before the announcement, he made it to the NBA Finals 9 out of those 12 seasons. And in the entire Western Conference, he finished the highest in the MVP race 9 seasons straight. That is dominance. If we're being honest, that's a level of individual dominance that Steph Curry can only dream of, as his longest streak was just 2 seasons.
Again,
did this man say the word individual?
We're talking about media awards here, man. The media just doesn't like
it's Steph's fault Magic couldn't stop
2017,
fucking, dog.
2018,
Yeah, Steph was in those rooms, man.
We gotta just change the subject now, bro.
Steph was
The
in those rooms telling
audacity
the
to use
girls,
the word
right? Alright.
individual is crazy.
Well,
Get
again,
the
and
fuck
here's my
out of
thing,
here.
right? Is that he's still making like these are objective realities. Now the question is, what is the context behind it? Because this guy had no problem acknowledging that, Magic's career was cut short. That all of these players had Magic's unfortunate circumstances. That
But hold on, real
this is
quick.
what their careers would look like. But guess what? We can apply the context and information that the competition in Magic's era was far less and comparatively worse than that of this era. And when the competition that you play against is lesser, it increases your ability to win awards. That, like, by definition, the pool of players, the pool of your competition is easier to win awards against. When you have guys like Damian Lillard, Ja Morant, Luka Doncic, guys like that you're competing with. Mind you, now you have injury circumstances. What if I arbitrarily said in 2018 Steph never had his torn MCL at the end of the season, and he ended up maybe because that was one of the most efficient seasons in NBA history, and he got all NBA third team because of those injuries. How about this? We pretend Steph never gets his regularly scheduled 1 to 2 injuries per year, and he would have at least 5 or 6 all NBA first teams, at least. And so, but we can't do that because that's not reality.
Hold on,
But
Dre. He's trying to make the argument that he would have played with Kobe and Shaq and that they would have won titles. So you're telling me he would have played 22 seasons? If that's the case, let's go back 10 years and say Steph Curry back in 1999 could have been playing with Chris Mullin and fucking Mitch Richmond and going and win titles. That makes no fucking sense. Players back then do not play 22 seasons. Nobody does a LeBron. Nobody. The fuck is he talking about? Would have been playing with Kobe and Magic and Kobe, Shaq,
here's
and
the
Magic.
argument, right? I could argue that if the Warriors had a more competent organization and they didn't draft James Wiseman, that Steph's career could have been the longevity of Steph's career could have been greater. I could argue that, but it's not real. It didn't happen. It's reality. The reality is it didn't happen. I could make up. He's just saying like, had this happened, had that happened, circumstances, hypotheticals. It's like, okay, but then I can just make the same arguments. If the Warriors were a more competent franchise, if they didn't lose KD in 2019, Steph would have more titles. If they didn't draft James Wiseman in 2020, Steph would have a greater longevity to compete for titles down the road. Like, I can make any fucking argument I want. This is not based in or grounded in reality and you can argue it's logical, but that at the end of the day, we can't argue hypotheticals. We can only argue what happened within the frame and the context of what's around them and your competition, the players you play next to, all those things. And you can argue. I'm not even mad if you argue Magic is greater than Steph. That's not even the argument here. My argument is this video is inherently inconsistent. Like, Magic Johnson, to me, you can argue he's the greatest point guard ever. That's fine because he's in that conversation. Obviously, he's been consensusly the best ever for decades. So that's not my argument. My argument is Steph has a fucking case. That's number one. Steph has a case. This guy makes it sound like Steph doesn't even have a case. That's ridiculous. Magic, if you want to argue it's Magic, that's fine. He has a case. He has a great case. But don't pretend that Steph doesn't have a case. That's my first overarching point of this whole thing. My second overarching point is this video is full of inconsistencies in making Magic's case. Like if you're going to make a case, it's got to be consistent, right? So like I said, the first point is that Steph does have a case and he belongs in the conversation. And my second point is if you're going to make a case, it better be consistent and full and complete. If it's not, then the logic is got to be thrown in the trash. Like it doesn't work. It
He's
doesn't hold
using
water.
fantasy scenarios. Oh, he would have played with Kobe and Shaq and them. Let's say the Lakers did get Shaq and Magic never retired. Are they even in a position, if he's saying they made the finals 9 out of 12 years, are they even in a position to draft Kobe Bryant? Like, let's be honest.
Exactly.
I can make a case that if Kevin Durant never left the Golden State Warriors, Steph would probably be on 6 or 7 championships.
Would Magic be any good by that point anyway?
Yeah, that's my point. That's my point. What's stopping Magic from just being a role player at that point?
But that exactly. No, that's exactly my ultimate point. Exactly. Seidel, if you can, appreciate you.
Now, some Steph Curry fans will argue in his favor, saying that Steph changed the game with his three-point shooting, and thus did something that no other great has ever done before. I'm gonna be honest, I hate this argument so deeply because it isn't nearly as unique as they make it seem. When you narrow down the list of the top 10 greatest players of all time, nearly every one of them did something that completely changed basketball. For example, Michael Jordan made the game global. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson literally saved the NBA in the 1980s. Wilt Chamberlain changed the rulebook because of his dominance, as the league office was looking for ways to slow him down and balance the league. Bill Russell won more championships than any other player in NBA history. Other than Bill Russell, the longest streak of championships by a player is 3 straight rings. Bill doubled that and then added 2 more on top of it. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar uniquely dominated the league as he introduced the most indefensible shot of all time, the skyhook. In the history of the game, no player has ever had an entire conference gearing up to stop him like Shaquille O'Neal did in the early 2000s. I could keep going, but as you can see, many all-time greats have done things that have changed the game.
All right, pause it.
What the hell is this guy talking
This is
about?
my
Who's his favorite team,
so
though?
this
Who's
is
his
the
favorite
argument.
team? I need to
Honestly,
know who's favorite
I
team.
could let him get away with all the other bullshit, right? Like, I think it's still stupid, but this is where I catch him, right? You know when Stephen A's like, "You got caught, you got caught." This is where you got caught, man. This is where you get caught because here's the thing: no Steph Curry fan has ever argued that Steph is the only player to exclusively change the game of basketball. No Steph fan has ever said that. Of course, Magic and Bird saved the NBA in the 80s. Of course, Michael Jordan globalized the game in the 90s. Of course, Shaquille O'Neal was so dominant and teams had to construct rosters to stop him. Of course, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had the most unstoppable move known to man. Of course, all these things. But at the end of the day, no player, and this argument holds water, because statistically, empirically, any angle you take, no player has changed the game to the degree, to the extent that Steph Curry has when you talk about the complexion of the sport, when you talk about the geometry of the court, when you talk about how to bend defenses.
There's a difference
Change it.
between the league. There's a difference between the league, right, and the world. Stephen Curry
Stylistically.
influenced the world on how to play basketball,
He
not
gave
just the
kids.
league.
Wait, hold on, Shadow. He gave kids who aren't athletic, who are fucking like can't jump. Look at Pods. Just for an example, Pods does not have the foot speed of anything. But what does Pods have? He can shoot. He's smart, and he can fucking shoot the shit out of a basketball. He gave players like that a chance in the NBA. Back then, those dudes would not get a fucking chance.
And my only point is that go ahead. Oh, of course. And here's the thing.
Who
I will
brought
never
Showtime? Magic didn't bring shit, but Magic brought Showtime. Stop this, man. Fucking Jerry Buss brought Showtime, man. Come on, man. Let's cut it out. They were planted actors in there to sell tickets at the Forum, and they had a club after it. That's it, bro. I was there, brother. I was there. I was around in the 80s, bro. I was sitting on my dad's lap watching basketball every day, all day, bro. We're not gonna lie. Just like there's a, did you hear what this man said? There is no offensive player that's ever been schemed on like Shaquille O'Neal. Like, huh? What? What? Michael fucking Jeffrey Jordan? There's not fucking Steph Curry that has 3 guys going at him? Like,
Giannis had 3 dudes in the paint in the
come
2021
on. Like,
NBA Finals. Bro.
Shaq definitely had dominance. Shaq definitely had paint gravity. But come on, man. Like, he's saying things like Steph didn't do, and it's just like cap, bro. It's
Well, here's the
complete
thing.
cap.
He's making so this is what you call a false equivalence. He is basically equivocating all of these players who have changed the game in one way or another to what Steph is doing with what Steph has done with the 3-point shot, and it's a unequal argument because at the end of the day, no player has changed the game to the extent, to the degree with which Steph has. When you talk about shooting
But
the ball,
not only just that, there was no time that Magic Johnson didn't have the best team, dog. Magic Johnson just had the best team. Like, I'm not saying he wasn't a great player. No, but Magic Johnson's team was always better than Larry Bird's team. What are we talking about? Do you know how good Michael Cooper was? Michael Cooper might be one of the top 3 defender of all time. Michael Cooper wasn't a better defender than Kevin McHale? Hold on. Michael Cooper wasn't a better defender than Hold on. Michael Cooper wasn't a better defender than Kevin McHale? Oh, okay, so let's talk English for the chat, bro. Michael Cooper, did you hear what I said? Is arguably a top 3 defender to ever play the game. The man won 8 defensive players straight. Like big game James Worthy, the previous to Magic Johnson getting drafted, won the Finals MVP. James Worthy was an amazing fucking player and was a Hall of Famer consensusly, and one of the greatest at his position ever, and was a two-side consensusly. The only time, the only time that to me, I, s- I- that's one time. That's one time, and that's an argument. And I still think the team wasn't better. I think Larry Bird just went into his bag, and he was just dragging those guys to a different level. The level of what Larry Bird was, that was like the equivalent of Steph's 2016 season, where Steph was just had superpowers. That season, Larry Bird just had his superpowers.
Shadow, real quick, who are you talking to? Because I don't think I can hear who you're talking to.
Oh, it's Jay.
Jay, you might have to come back up. People in the chat that they can't
A
hear
lot
you.
of people can't hear you. They're saying it in the chat too.
But I just hope the overarching point that I'm making here is relayed, which is no player has changed the geometry of the sport, the stylistic approach with which teams have adopted. I'm not saying Mike D'Antoni, and then people will bring up Mike D'Antoni 7 seconds or less. People will bring up, the high octane offenses, all that. At the end of the day, Steph Curry changed how LeBron
But it's
plays the
not
game.
even that. When
LeBron,
Steph came. Look at the free throws per team when Stephen Curry came in, and look till now how the game has grown.
but look at
When
how
he got drafted, they were shooting 18 threes a
look at
game.
how LeBron
It's
has
damn
changed.
near 40 threes a game right now, bro. Like,
LeBron has adjusted his game to the modern style, which Steph was the pioneer of. LeBron has attempted far more threes post, it's particularly since joining the Lakers. But and you can argue that's roster construction, blah blah blah. But I mean, you can look at the moment Steph 2015 onwards. LeBron has attempted more threes in that stretch of his career than he did prior. So you look at LeBron, how he's adapted and how he's changed his own game, who's one of the greatest players ever. It's at the end of the day, my point is, and the point that this video is just failing to acknowledge and recognize, which is, sure, there's other players in NBA history throughout time that have changed the game in their own ways, right? But at the end of the day, Steph Curry has one of the best arguments that the way he changed the game what is far more impactful, far more global, far more influential than any one way Kareem Skyhook or even when people bring up how LeBron changed the way we perceive free agency and how players kind of take control of their own careers. And I'm not denying that. I'm not denying the impact and the meaning behind that. But there's degrees and there's extents and there's levels to with which we can argue these points, right? This is a false equivalency. So I don't like how he broad brushed and said Steph fans argue that Steph is the only player to have changed the game. No Steph fan argues that. Of course there's other players that have changed the game. Just none of them have done it to the extent that Steph has and to the impact and affecting how teams, how organizations view the game with analytics, how players work on their games. Look at Brooke Lopez. Look at Al Horford. Look at how players have adjusted their games, completely changed. Brooke Lopez in 2012 was one of the elite post players in the NBA, averaging 20 a night through post hooks, post fades, ducks, drop steps, any post move you could think of. Now he's just taking 6 threes a night, just chucking from 31 feet out. Like, that's a result of Steph Curry. And that's a direct byproduct of what he's done to change how we view the game, how we play the game. So yes, at the end of the day, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but you guys get my point. Anyways. If you could unpause, appreciate you.
Saying my boy changed the game with his shooting isn't swaying anything when you're looking at the select few greatest players of all time. Earlier I mentioned how mainstream media is already pushing this narrative. One of those people is Colin Cowherd, who claims that Steph Curry has already surpassed Magic Johnson, due mostly to the fact that Steph is a great shooter and Magic is not. I'm not gonna lie, this is one of the dumbest arguments you could possibly make when comparing greats. Holding past legends to the standard of what makes players great in the modern game is ridiculously biased and seems desperate for a hot take. If you went back in time and during the 1980s you told Magic Johnson he wasn't the best point guard because he couldn't shoot from the perimeter, he would probably say, "What the hell does that have to do with me winning a championship?" Magic was the guy who found his shooters, like Michael Cooper and Byron Scott. And at that time, that era wasn't defined by screens and three-point shooting, but it was defined by fast-break transitional basketball.
That's true in a way. So let me correct him here, because this guy's saying some things that are true, some things that aren't exactly true. He said the era wasn't defined by screens, when in reality, screens have been part of the game of basketball for decades. They were running weave, floppy. The Celtics ran floppy in the 80s. I get, and you can say the word defined is the operative word in this situation where, like, defined, but then that would be making the argument that the Lakers defined the era, which most people would argue it was the Celtics and the Lakers, because the Celtics won a couple of championships as well in that decade. So the Celtics ran floppy. They ran a bunch of actions that involved screens. They did. They ran, in fact, so did the, well, you could argue that, maybe not screens, but the Celtics and the Lakers and most teams, even the Sixers at the time, were running offenses through the post. So when he's talking about high-octane offenses, what happened when the game was played in the half court? Because there was a damn ton of possessions played in the half court, and those possessions were played through the post, through guys like Kareem, through guys like Larry Bird, McHale, Parrish. You look at guys like, Julius Erving, Daryl Dawkins. Like, these guys were getting fed the ball. Even, you could argue, even if you want to go back a little bit earlier, Bill Walton. And they were getting fed the ball, and they were making plays, or they were getting double teamed and had to pass out of it and reset. Like, Magic was actually not a good perimeter shooter, which hurt his team because they could key in on Kareem more, force Magic to take a 17-footer, which he was not that efficient at taking, which resulted in a more efficient defensive outcome. So Magic's lack of ability to shoot hurt his team regardless of era. Because at the end of the day, spacing maybe was not in theoretically wasn't as valued as it was then, but still being a guy that could shoot the ball and having the ability to shoot was still valuable at the time because the more space you could create for these post players to operate, to either score or make a play, the better. And the reason why, the best post players were the ones that won the titles back in the 80s. You look at the Lakers with Kareem, with James Worthy, with Magic to a lesser extent. He's a 6'9" guard. And then you look at teams like the Celtics with Bird and with McHale and with Parrish and all them. And then they got some ancillary dudes that could fill in the gaps, like Danny Ainge, like Dennis Johnson. You got guys like Michael Cooper defensively, Kurt Rambis. You know what I'm saying? But you understand what I'm saying is that the game was played differently back then. And so now I want to make one more point, which is, and this point I think is very important, positions are meaningless today. We understand that, right? Like, we see Victor Wembanyama, who's 7'5", bringing the ball up the court. And, like, you got to understand, like, that wasn't happening in the 80s. That wasn't happening in the 70s. And so positions aren't as meaningful. We don't box players in. We don't label them today as we did back then. And that's an important distinction because why are we adopting and embracing an obsolete frame of mind and applying it to today's game, right? We're saying, well, why not hold, why are we holding this and that against Magic? It's like, okay, fine, but then why are we holding traditional, quote-unquote traditional, pure point guard responsibilities to Steph? Think about what I'm saying right now, because this is a deep, profound point that I think I don't know how easy it is to grasp, but we are applying, when people say traditional and pure point guard, we are applying an obsolete, an outdated mindset, an outdated labeling system to today's game, which is considered positionless. That is backwards. Why don't we just adopt and adapt to the times? Why do we even view things through the lens of pure point guard, traditional? Magic was finding his shooters, but Steph is the shooter. It's like, well, yeah, Steph is the shooter because today's point guards, today's players are more well-rounded. Today's players are more positionless. Steph can play the one or the two. Magic couldn't play the two. I'd argue Steph has greater positional versatility offensively.
And
Now
Dre, 1 second, real quick, to add on to your point of what he was saying when he said, "Oh, Magic was finding the shooters." Doesn't Steph have gravity? Steph gets dudes open. Let's look at dude's career effective field goal percentage before Steph and after Steph.
now you could also make the argument that Magic played the five, right? And you could say that too. And I'm not saying Magic didn't have positional versatility, but when you talk about offensively, he couldn't space the floor like Steph. He couldn't, he didn't have the spacing and the gravity with which Steph has off the ball. So my point is that, and B makes a good point as well. Like, at the end of the day, we have to look at the eras and we have to contextualize styles within the frame of which the player is playing in. So I don't know why we're applying traditional, pure point guard definitions, responsibilities, and ideas to Steph Curry when in the modern era, positionless basketball has defined how we play the game. LeBron literally plays the one. LeBron can play the 3, the 4, and the 5. LeBron was guarding Jokic. LeBron was playing the point guard in 2020. LeBron was playing the 3 and the 4 in 2012, 2013. LeBron is multi-positional. He's versatile. We're not boxing LeBron in to any single position, and we shouldn't because LeBron is so versatile he doesn't need to be. But why are we saying LeBron's not a traditional small forward? It's like, because he's playing the 5? Because he can guard 5s? Like, yeah, maybe he's not the greatest defensive 5, but like, he can still, run the floor, run an offense 4 out. He can defend some 5s. Like, I don't understand this. And then with Steph, it's like, well, did we not just see Steph average the most assists in the entire series against the Lakers? Have we not seen Steph throughout his career on the ball play in a quote-unquote traditional... See, here's my thing. If Steph averaged like 4 or 5 assists, I understand that kind of. Like, it's like, yeah, he's not the greatest on-ball playmaker. He's not like the greatest playmaker, like traditionally with a pure point guard. Kind of that skill set, right? Like putting the ball on the floor, pick and roll, finding guys, skip passes, like one-handed dump offs behind. Like, I get that. But Steph can fucking do that. So what are you even talking about? Like, just because Steph is better at shooting the basketball and scoring than he is at playmaking, it doesn't take away from his ability as a point guard. He can be a point guard. We've literally seen throughout his career stretches, seasons, where he can put the ball on the floor in his hands, high ball screen, make plays for others, average 7, 8, 9 assists a night. We saw it. He had a 30-point triple-double against the Lakers. He had, 14 assists, I think it was?
You're not an all-time great if you can't do those things. If you can't be an on and off ball playmaker.
Bro, it's not even just the passing though, man. He goes through the lane and drags 3 guys with him, man. Like, come on.
That's my point.
Exactly. So that's my ultimate point is, and I want people to understand the concept, right? The concept I'm introducing here is, why are we applying traditional frames of thought, schools of thought, to the present day modern game, which is positionless? If it's positionless today, if every player can do everything, Steph averages 5 rebounds a night, 5, 6 rebounds a night. If it's positionless today, why are we applying traditional thoughts and definitions and labels and limitations to how the game is played today, and even vice versa. I think that's a stupid argument to say, why could Magic not shoot? Because it wasn't emphasized or valued back then. The game was played through the post. If you could shoot, it was a bonus because it gave that post player extra space to operate. But Magic didn't need to do that. But you know what I will say is, Steph offensively is far more complete than Magic. And you can argue the reasons behind that. You could say it's because of the era. You could argue because it's the players have gotten better, they developed, blah blah blah. At the end of the day, Steph is more complete. When you look at the 4 subdivisions of offense: on ball scoring, off ball scoring, on ball playmaking, off ball playmaking. Right? We can go break down what they mean. On ball scoring, high ball screen, pick and roll, isolation. Off ball scoring, off pin downs, curls. Screen actions, floppy, horns, anything that involves moving off the ball, cuts, back doors, cross screens, like anything that involves a player that doesn't have the ball in their hands, creating actions, creating secondary actions that create chaos and havoc and motion for the defense to consider. Those things, okay, that's just scoring. Now you look at playmaking, on-ball playmaking, putting the ball on the floor, making reads, seeing how to bend the defense, finding guys in the corner, skip passes, drop-offs, like pocket passes, pick and roll, transition, leak outs, anything that involves having the ball in your hands and making a play on the ball for others. And then off-ball playmaking, moving off of the ball with the intent to create offense for others, which is a very unique skill set that only few players ever in NBA history have had, and especially at a high level. Moving off the ball with the threat to be able to shoot it at any moment, but essentially bending the defense, creating an overreaction that allows openings and advantages for your teammates to convert easier shots. What Steph does is, on the perimeter, as off the ball, as a playmaker, creates these openings and lanes for his teammates to score inside for easy, highly efficient opportunities. There's a reason the Warriors in 2021, with one of the worst rosters in the NBA, led the NBA in dunks, and it wasn't Steph Curry yamming on folks. So, at the end of the day, when we break it down, on-ball scoring, off-ball scoring, on-ball playmaking, off-ball playmaking, the 4 subdivisions of offense, there's no basketball player, in my opinion, in NBA history, not point guard, not shooting guard, not small forward, I'm saying basketball player, that does all 4, the combination of all 4 better than Steph Curry. The combination of all 4. When you add them all up and you look at the totality and the comprehensive impact that all 4 have, no player does it better than Steph. So we can talk about shooting all day, but why doesn't this guy bring up every facet of offense? Because it favors Steph. If you look at it, you can argue Magic was a better on-ball playmaker. That's fine. But I would never argue he's a better on-ball scorer. I would never argue he's a better off-ball scorer. And I would never argue he's a better off-ball playmaker. Hell no. So you're telling me now and now here's the thing. The gap between his on-ball playmaking and Steph's on-ball playmaking is not even close to the gap between their off-ball scoring, on-ball scoring, or off-ball playmaking. So you can dice it up however you want. But Steph Curry's the greatest offensive player ever, and I can make a compelling argument for that. And then the defensive side of the ball, I have something special for you guys for another one of these, but I'm going to save that for later. But get ready for that shit, because that's going to melt a lot of minds. Anyways, unpause the video if you can, Side. I'll appreciate you.
Which no one was better at than Magic. None of those stars in the 80s gave a damn about winning a hypothetical horse competition with players from the future. They were trying to win championships in that era based on the style of that era. And clearly, Magic was very good at doing that, which should be what truly matters. Now listen, this video is not intended to come across as a Steph Curry slander video. My only point is that people are young and overreactive sometimes, and they're prematurely trying to put him in a spot that currently belongs to someone else. As of now, Magic has the edge in dominant consistency, championships, and individual accolades. I just don't see an angle where you can legitimately elevate Steph Curry above him at this current time. With that being said, Steph isn't showing any signs of slowing down either, and shooting ability is one of the skills that age the most gracefully in the NBA. So you would be foolish to say that it's impossible for him to pass Magic at some point in the future. As in the case of most things, time will tell. So what do you guys think? Am I wrong? Has Steph already passed Magic as the greatest point guard of all time? And if he hasn't, what would he Make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Perfect.
Dre,
Now,
I figured it out. No,
go
no,
ahead,
no,
bro.
no. He doesn't believe none of this stuff he's saying.
All
He
for clicks
just
and
wants
views.
shock value because anytime there's slander with Steph, look what happens to Lakers tweets or people say so, or fucking Tony Durant who's saying some behind his burner says some shit.
Bro, that
We
was 10 minutes of
we
bullshit,
run
bro.
like bunch of bozos and we start defending him. They end up getting a bunch of quote tweets, like hundreds of them. They get the impressions. They end up getting like fucking 200,000-300,000 impressions off of the one tweet. Just like on this video, he's gonna get a bunch of likes, and probably out of all the videos, he's gonna have the most comments out of any video. Why? Because Wardell's attached to it. That's
Steph
all this
moved the
is.
needle.
That's a very fair point, Seth.
That's all this is, man.
But at the end of the day, I'm making this, and then I'm gonna post this on YouTube, and then I'm gonna hopefully people see this, and they see the truth and the reality. And I will say this too, just to address his last few points. He made a couple of points. He said championships, individual accolades, and I think he said dominant consistency or consistency of dominance is the edge that Magic has on Steph. I'll give you championships because that's objectively true, 5-4. Individual accolades, I could say, is a product of competition or lack thereof. But you know what? I'm not going to do that because the reality is the reality. So
Only
we
one
can
of them is a unanimous MVP, Dre. Just putting that out.
I can make the arguments for Steph as well with accolades that Magic has not had either. Exactly. Has Steph ever won a championship? Or sorry, has Steph ever won? Has Magic ever won multiple championships without a top 75 player? Because I know Steph, Kobe, and Duncan have. Steph, Kobe, and Duncan have. So I can just pick and choose which individual accolades and what means what. But anyways, it's all subjective at the end of the day. But it is objectively true that Magic has more titles, and I'll give you that, which is why Urkel was saying earlier in, I think, the previous playback, he was like, once Steph gets 5, it's a wrap. Like, it's the door's shut, which I agree. I think when Steph gets 5, I think then the conversations turn to, okay, look at dominance, look at competition. And here's the other thing. He said dominance and consistency. Steph Curry's been at it for what? Over like around 10 plus years now. And Magic, if I'm not mistaken, his prime was cut short at around 10 years. 10, 11 years, I think it was. If I'm not mistaken. So Magic may have the slight edge of... like, here's the thing. If Steph plays at an elite level for another 2 to 3 years and he wins another title, I think the door's shut. I think it's a wrap. And here's the other thing, is that Steph right now is in the conversation even if he doesn't. If Steph falls off a cliff next year, doesn't win another title, he's still in the conversation. Like, my ultimate point, like I said with this video, is it's not to prove that Steph Curry's the greatest point guard ever, even though I think he is. And he has an argument. The point is that he belongs in the conversation, and the idea, the notion that it's blasphemous to suggest otherwise is incorrect. And then the other point, the main overarching purpose of me doing this whole thing was for people to understand the inconsistencies that are made in videos such as this. There's so many inconsistencies. We just spent, I don't even know how long, an hour, maybe long, like
about an hour and a half.
Just breaking down point by point by point, like how we can apply certain logic in other ways, how we can pick and choose what matters, how for certain players, you acknowledge one thing and you omit another thing, how you got to explain and acknowledge the complete picture when having these conversations, how the logic has to apply to both sides. Like, we've gone through a crash course in consistency, or trying to be as consistent as possible. Now, I might listen back on this and say, oh, I actually wasn't consistent there. But, like, the goal is, I'm not saying we're going to be perfect, because we're not. We're humans. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. We're inconsistent sometimes. Fine. But the goal should be to do your research, to be informed, and to be consistent. And if you aspire to be those things, chances are you'll be as close to those things as you humanly can be. So ultimately, my point is, is that I felt like this video was reductive. I didn't think it did a good job of actually being consistent. I didn't feel it did a good job of painting a clear picture where one thing was acknowledged for Magic, another thing was omitted for Steph, where one context was, propped up as one thing, and these false equivalencies, these comparisons, counter arguments were not presented. I just thought it was incomplete. So this was a great exercise in logic. This was a great exercise in providing context and full picture. And I appreciate everybody for listening, because this was like a very intense playback. I feel it. Like, so any thoughts anyone has? Any thoughts or ideas or whatever?
I just gotta say shout out to Seidel, man.
Yo, oh yeah. I was gonna say, hey, go look in the chat. Everybody follow Seidel. I have his link, his Twitter link in the chat, his Twitter profile. Everybody click on that. Follow him. Follow him. Follow him. Follow him. Follow him. Follow him again.
Appreciate that, Dre. Plug your YouTube again, bro.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, dude, Seidel, man, this would have been a flop without you, man.
Hey, man, it's all
So
for
I
the culture,
appreciate
bro.
you, man.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, man, that you came in clutch, man. I gotta say.
Appreciate you, bro. Appreciate you.
All right, and we'll do a giveaway at the end of this month too. By the way, I haven't forgotten about those. We're almost at 75 subs for the YouTube. Hopefully, I can get to a little bit more tonight, but I'll upload these videos probably tomorrow at some point. But this was a great conversation. A little messy, but I like the messiness of it because it's intense. It's, kind of just, very, everybody jumps in and gives their own points, but we should do more of these. And if there's more videos that come out that we can criticize and critique and give our counterpoints to, I'm more than happy to do this, because I felt like this was very illuminating and a very good conversation. And this is the stuff that we should be doing, because at the end of the day, we all have to be armed with Steph Curry points and counter arguments. Like, we can't go into these debates with little information, little knowledge. We need to be as informed as possible when it comes to having conversations and discussions that involve these players. Like, it's important. You got to come in hot. So I appreciate everybody for coming through. If anyone wants to plug anything or whatever, you can do that. I'm going to leave, but if you want to continue this and take a different angle, watch NBA TV, whatever. It doesn't matter to me, but I'm chilling, man. So I appreciate everybody for sure. And I'll upload the clip or the full video of this tomorrow. And peace out, man. Appreciate you guys.
Alrighty.